My cousin publicly humiliated my autistic son in front of dozens, so we left, and she called CPS and tried to have my son taken away, not realizing just how fast the tables can turn. When my cousin Vanessa was having a wedding, my son Mikey was the first person I told. He has semi-low functioning autism, so more often than not, my friends or acquaintances specifically request for him not to come, which meant we never went to events together. But I assumed my aunt would be different. When I told him, he started jumping up and down and clapping his hands. "Really, Daddy? Really? I can go?" When I exclaimed an enthusiastic "yes," he jumped into my arms and we twirled around. One symptom of his autism is that he is quite easily joyed by the little things in life. So as we made our way to the wedding rehearsal, I made sure to prep Mikey on wedding manners. Don't talk during the ceremony. Try to be quiet. It's the bride's day, not ours, etc. He seemed pretty attentive, so I thought all would be okay. But we were halfway through the practice ceremony when Mikey started smiling really hard. He only does this when he's really happy about something. So I squeezed his hand tight as if to say, "I'm happy too." But we stayed completely silent, like radio silent. But when Vanessa made it to the top of the aisle, she screeched, "Excuse me? What is he doing here?" My heart dropped, and I turned to Mikey, who was still smiling, not knowing she was talking about him. No one else said anything, but instead of just continuing the ceremony and focusing on her wedding, Vanessa turned to her groom and screamed like a banshee, "I thought you told him not to come." By this point, she was pointing straight at Mikey, and he started tearing up. The audience was silently whispering, and I even caught sight of a few looks of disgust towards her. Unfortunately, they were the minority, because most of the audience were nodding their heads in agreement, as if it was the most disgraceful thing they'd ever seen. I wanted to yell at Vanessa, to tell everyone I can't wait until she dies of obesity so me and Mikey can dance on her grave, but I didn't say any of that. I wanted to be a good role model for Mikey, so we just walked out. As soon as we were outside the church, Mikey had a meltdown. "Why would she say that about you, Daddy? That was so mean." I thanked the heavens he didn't know it was about him. "Son, some people are just bitter because they don't like themselves." Luckily, this was just the wedding rehearsal, and 2 days later, the real wedding happened. Luckily, Mikey believed the one we went to was the real one, so he didn't question it when I left him with the babysitter for the day. I'm a pretty big marriage guy. So for the first half of the day, I let Vanessa have her moment completely undisrupted. It wasn't until dinner that I tapped my glass to make a speech. The whole room was silent. Vanessa took the opportunity to mouth the words, "Thank you for not bringing him." I smiled, but not for the reason she was thinking. As you can see, I am currently at this wedding without my wonderful son, Mikey. The air was filled with an awkward tension, but I didn't care. A lot of you didn't want him here today, but he still wanted to give a few words. I then took my phone out and started playing a voice recording. It was one I had secretly recorded of Mikey talking about how happy he was for Vanessa and her husband in 7-year-old terms. Hearing his voice so full of happiness made me tear up, and the rest of the table did too, except Vanessa, who looked so angry I thought she was about to explode. Still, she cheersed with me and the rest of the family. Little did I know, that moment ended up being the calm before the storm, because the next day, not even 24 hours later, there was a knock at the door, and it wasn't Vanessa. Instead, it was CPS. They asked me a few vague questions before barging past me and examining my home. My head was spinning, and I barely understood what was going on. The woman started marking every little thing down on a clipboard. Mikey's mattress with no bed frame because of overstimulation. Noted. Plastic on the furniture because of Mikey's toilet accidents. Noted. Locks on the cupboards to protect him from sharp objects. All noted. All marked as evidence. I tried to tell her about his autism, but that's when she whispered under her breath, "That's what they all say," before calling her higher up. I assumed this was due to inexperience, since she looked like she just graduated college. When she hung up, she told me they had to do an emergency removal order and were going to place him in the hands of his closest relative. I immediately offered his grandma. The following 72 hours were hell. My stomach was turning, and I felt completely powerless. And above everything, I was angry. I knew somehow Vanessa was behind this, and once everything was said and done, I planned on making her pay. This wasn't just about excluding him from a wedding anymore. She was trying to take my son away permanently. As I sat in my empty house, surrounded by Mikey's toys and clothes, I started making phone calls. First to a lawyer who specialized in family court and disability rights. Then to my mom, who confirmed they hadn't placed Mikey with her despite my request. Then to Mikey's developmental pediatrician, who was outraged when I explained the situation. Nobody messes with my son. Nobody. Vanessa had no idea what she'd just started. I spent the next morning frantically gathering every document I could find related to Mikey's care. Medical records, therapy assessments, school IEPs, notes from his pediatrician, anything that would prove I was a good father. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely organize the papers. I kept thinking about Mikey and where he might be. Was he getting his medications? Did they know about his sensory issues? Was someone making sure he had his special blanket at night? I called his developmental pediatrician, Dr. Chen, again to see if she could write a letter explaining his accommodations. She was absolutely furious about the situation. I've been Mikey's doctor for 5 years. Those accommodations are medically necessary, not neglect. She sounded personally offended. I'll have a letter for you within the hour, and I'm happy to testify if needed. While waiting, I reached out to my neighbor Morgan, who works as a special education teacher. She's known Mikey since he was 4 and has helped me implement a lot of his home strategies. She immediately offered to write a character reference. This is absolutely ridiculous, she said. I see you with Mikey every day. You're the most devoted father I know. By noon, I had a small stack of documentation and was on my way to meet with the lawyer I'd called Elizabeth Reyes. She specialized in cases involving children with disabilities and came highly recommended by a parent support group I belonged to. Her office was small, but welcoming, with children's drawings on the walls. Elizabeth was all business, though, taking detailed notes as I explained everything from the wedding invitation to the CPS visit. So, you believe your niece made this call as retaliation for the recording? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. I know it sounds paranoid, but the timing is too perfect. Less than 24 hours after I embarrassed her at her wedding, CPS shows up? Elizabeth didn't look surprised. Unfortunately, false CPS reports as revenge happen more often than you'd think. The good news is we can fight this. She explained. The emergency removal would require a hearing within 72 hours. We needed to be ready to present our case, which meant more documentation and witnesses who could vouch for my parenting. In the meantime, she said, I'll file an emergency motion for visitation. They can't keep you from seeing Mikey while this is investigated. I left her office with a to-do list a mile long and headed straight to Mikey's school. The principal, Mrs. Taylor, was shocked when I told her what happened. She immediately pulled Mikey's file and promised to write a letter documenting his progress and our regular meetings. I've seen how you are with him at every school event, she told me. Anyone who spends 5 minutes watching you two together knows how much you care. On my way home, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was tight with anger. I just got off the phone with your Aunt Linda. Apparently, Vanessa told her Mikey had a complete meltdown at the rehearsal, and you did nothing to control him. My blood boiled. What? He was perfectly quiet until she started screaming. I know, Mom said, but she's telling everyone you're neglectful and that Mikey is dangerous and out of control. Linda mentioned Vanessa was worried you're not equipped to handle his needs. That explained the CPS call. Vanessa had painted me as an incompetent father who couldn't manage his son's disability. The realization made me sick to my stomach. When I got home, there was another surprise waiting. A Facebook message from Thomas, Vanessa's new husband. It simply read, I had nothing to do with this. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure whether to believe him or not, but I screenshotted it anyway. Could be useful later. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Mr. Williams, this is Jordan from Child Protective Services. I'm Mikey's assigned caseworker. My heart skipped. Where's my son? Is he okay? He's currently in an emergency placement with a foster family experienced with autistic children. His voice was kinder than the woman who'd come to my house. I understand you requested placement with your mother. Yes, I said quickly. She knows his routines, his medications, everything. We're looking into that option, but I wanted to let you know you've been approved for a supervised visit tomorrow at 2 p.m. at our office. I nearly collapsed with relief. Thank you. I'll be there. After hanging up, I immediately called Elizabeth to update her. She was pleased about the visit, but warned me to be careful. They'll be watching your interactions closely, she cautioned. Be natural, but stay calm. Even if Mikey is upset, don't say anything negative about CPS or make accusations about your niece. That night was the longest of my life. I kept walking into Mikey's room, expecting to see him curled up with his dinosaur plushies. The empty bed made my chest hurt. I ended up sleeping on his floor just to feel close to him. The next day, I arrived at the CPS office an hour early, clutching Mikey's favorite comfort item, a soft blue octopus toy he called Squish. The waiting room was depressing, all faded posters and uncomfortable chairs. I watched the clock tick by minute, by agonizing minute. When they finally brought Mikey in, I had to physically restrain myself from running to him. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. Daddy! He launched himself at me, and I caught him in a tight hug. Over his shoulder, I could see the caseworker, Jordan, watching us with a neutral expression. Hey, buddy, I said, my voice thick. I missed you so much. Mikey was talking a mile a minute, telling me about the strange house and the lady who doesn't cut sandwiches right. It broke my heart that he didn't understand why he couldn't come home with me. When our hour was up, the meltdown was catastrophic. He clung to me, screaming and sobbing. I tried the calming techniques we always use, but nothing worked. The more upset he got, the more I worried it looked bad for me. I want to go home, he wailed, as a staff member tried to gently pry him away. I want my daddy. It took everything I had not to break down myself as I watched them carry my hysterical son down the hallway. Once he was out of sight, I sat in my car and sobbed. Back at home, I checked my email to find Dr. Chen had sent her letter, emphatically stating that all of Mikey's home accommodations were appropriate and recommended. I forwarded it to Elizabeth, just as my phone rang again. It was my mom. I just got a call from CPS. They're doing a home inspection tomorrow to see if I can take Mikey temporarily. This was progress. If they approved Mom's house, at least Mikey would be with family until we could get him home. That's great, Mom. Did they say anything else? There was a pause. Just that they received additional concerns about your care of Mikey. My stomach dropped. Additional concerns? From who? They wouldn't say, but I have a pretty good guess, she said grimly. Vanessa was doubling down. I wondered what new lies she was telling now. The thought made me angry enough to do something I probably shouldn't have. I called her directly. To my surprise, she actually answered. What do you want? Her voice was cold. I want to know why you're trying to take my son away from me, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. She scoffed. I'm not doing anything except expressing legitimate concerns about my nephew. Mikey needs professional help. Not just you making excuses for his behavior. He has professional help. He has doctors and therapists, and he still can't behave properly in public, she interrupted. The way you let him act at my rehearsal proves you can't handle him. I was so stunned I could barely speak. He was completely quiet until you started screaming at him. That's not how I remember it, she said smugly. And neither do most of the guests. That's when it hit me. She was getting other people to make statements against me. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. I immediately called Elizabeth to tell her about the conversation. She advised me not to contact Vanessa again and to document everything that had happened so far. I spent the rest of the evening writing a detailed timeline, from the wedding invitation to the CPS visit. The hearing was scheduled for the next day. Elizabeth met me outside the courthouse, looking confident in a crisp suit. We have strong documentation, she reassured me, and Dr. Chen will be testifying by phone. As we walked in, I saw Vanessa sitting in the hallway with an older woman I didn't recognize. She smirked when she saw me. The hearing room was small and less formal than I expected. The judge, an older man named Judge Williams, reviewed the initial CPS report while Elizabeth presented our documentation, the letters from Dr. Chen, Mrs. Taylor, and Morgan, along with all of Mikey's medical records. Your Honor, Elizabeth said, the accommodations CPS flagged as concerning are all medically recommended for a child with Mikey's specific needs. They're not signs of neglect, but of attentive parenting. The CPS worker who'd inspected my house testified next, describing what she'd found. When questioned by Elizabeth about her experience with autistic children, she admitted she had limited training. And did you consult with any autism specialists before determining these accommodations were inappropriate? Elizabeth asked. Well, no, but thank you. Elizabeth cut her off smoothly. Dr. Chen's testimony was powerful. She explained each accommodation in detail and why it was necessary for Mikey. She also emphasized how well Mikey was doing under my care. I have patients whose parents refuse to implement these strategies, she said firmly. Mr. Williams has gone above and beyond to create an appropriate environment for his son. I thought we were making progress until the CPS attorney called his next witness, Vanessa. She walked to the front, looking solemn, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. She described the rehearsal incident completely differently, claiming Mikey had been disruptive and uncontrolled. She also said she'd seen me manhandle him when he got upset. I've been concerned about my uncle's ability to parent for years, she said, with fake sincerity. I only called CPS because I genuinely fear for Mikey's well-being. Elizabeth's cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Johnson, isn't it true that you called CPS less than 24 hours after Mr. Williams played a recording of his son at your wedding reception? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. The timing is coincidental. And isn't it true that you explicitly didn't want Mikey at your wedding because of his autism? That's not... Yes or no, please, Vanessa glared. I wanted an adult-only wedding. Elizabeth smiled slightly. Yet several children were present, correct? Your flower girl, ring bearer, and at least 3 other guest children. Vanessa's face flushed. Those children know how to behave. So it wasn't an adult-only wedding. You specifically didn't want one child, Mikey, because of his disability. The judge was watching Vanessa carefully now. Elizabeth continued her questioning, establishing that Vanessa had rarely interacted with Mikey before the wedding and had no expertise in autism or child development. One final question, Elizabeth said. Did you tell your guests that Mr. Williams shouldn't bring Mikey to the rehearsal? Vanessa hesitated. I might have mentioned it to a few people. So you deliberately excluded a child based on his disability, then called child services when his father brought attention to this discrimination? Objection, the CPS attorney called. Argumentative. Sustained, said the judge, but he was frowning at Vanessa. When it was time for closing statements, Elizabeth emphasized that while Mikey's care might look unusual to someone unfamiliar with autism, everything in my home was designed for his well-being. The only evidence against my client is the testimony of a woman who has demonstrated clear bias against his son and who made this report immediately after being embarrassed at her wedding. The judge took a short recess to review everything. Those 20 minutes felt like years. I kept replaying Vanessa's testimony in my head, furious at how she'd twisted everything. When Judge Williams returned, he looked directly at me. "Mr. Williams, I'm dismissing the emergency removal order. Based on the evidence presented, I see no indication of neglect or harm. In fact, quite the opposite. The relief was so intense I nearly fell out of my chair. However," he continued, "I am ordering a follow-up home visit with a specialist in developmental disabilities to ensure all accommodations are appropriate. Until then, your son will be placed with his grandmother, with unlimited visitation for you." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was close. Mikey would be with family, and I could see him whenever I wanted. As we left the courtroom, Vanessa pushed past me, face twisted with anger. "This isn't over," she hissed. Elizabeth put a hand on my shoulder. "Actually, I think it is," she said loudly enough for Vanessa to hear. "And if you make any more false reports, my client will pursue legal action for harassment." I was allowed to pick Mikey up from the foster home that afternoon. The foster mom seemed nice, but admitted he'd been struggling. "He's barely slept," she told me gently. "He keeps asking for his daddy and his room." When Mikey saw me, he was cautious at first, like he was afraid I'd disappear again. But when I told him we were going to Grandma's house, his whole body relaxed. "And you'll be there too?" he asked anxiously. "Every day, buddy, I promise." On the drive to my mom's, Mikey fell asleep, clutching Squish. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, still not quite believing I had him back. At Mom's house, we set up his temporary room together, trying to make it as familiar as possible. I brought his weighted blanket, his visual schedule board, and some of his favorite books. Mom had already stocked the fridge with his preferred foods. "I always knew that girl was trouble," Mom muttered as we worked. "Even as a child, she was a bully." I told her about Vanessa's threat as we left court. Mom shook her head. "Let her try something," she said fiercely. We're ready for her now." That night, I stayed at Mom's, sleeping on an air mattress next to Mikey's bed. Around midnight, I woke to find him standing next to me, tears streaking his face. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, pulling him close. "I had a bad dream," he whispered. "The mean lady took me away again." I held him tight, promising no one would ever take him away. Eventually, he fell back asleep in my arms, and I carefully carried him back to bed. The next morning, I got a call from Jordan, the CPS caseworker. The specialist would be doing their home visit at my house the following day. We arranged for Mikey to be there too, so they could observe us in our normal environment. "For what it's worth," Jordan said, "after reviewing Dr. Chen's letter and the judge's decision, I don't anticipate any issues." I spent the day deep cleaning the house and making sure everything was perfect. Mom helped me organize Mikey's medication chart and therapy schedule to show the specialist. That evening, I got a strange text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this." I opened my email to find a message with no subject line. The attachment was a video file. I clicked play and felt my blood run cold. It was footage from Vanessa's wedding reception, taken by someone at a nearby table. It showed me giving my toast and playing Mikey's recording, but it also captured what happened after, when I thought no one was watching. Vanessa was leaning close to several guests, pointing at me and clearly talking about me. The camera was too far away to catch what she was saying, but her gestures were animated and angry. Then came the decisive moment. She pulled out her phone, typed something, and showed it to the person next to her, who nodded encouragingly. The timestamp on the video was 9:47 p.m. According to my CPS documentation, the initial report was made at 9:52 p.m., 5 minutes later. I immediately forwarded the video to Elizabeth with the message, "Proof Vanessa made the call from the wedding reception." Her response came quickly. "Bingo. Who sent this to you?" I realized I still didn't know. I replied to the unknown number. "Thank you. Who is this?" The response shocked me. "Thomas, Vanessa's husband. I'm sorry about all of this. I tried to stop her. I didn't know what to make of this. Was he genuinely sorry, or was this some kind of trap?" I decided to be cautious. "Why are you helping me?" I texted back. "Because what she's doing is wrong," came the reply. "She's been obsessed with making you pay for humiliating her. She even convinced her bridesmaid to make a false statement to CPS. This was huge." I called Elizabeth and read her the texts. She advised me to ask Thomas if he'd be willing to provide a statement, but not to pressure him. "Be careful," she warned. "If Vanessa finds out he's helping you, it could create an even bigger problem." I texted Thomas again. "Would you be willing to tell the truth to CPS?" The response took almost an hour. "I'll think about it, but Vanessa can't know it was me." The next day was the home visit with the specialist. Dr. Ramirez was nothing like the first CPS worker. She was older, experienced, and immediately got down on Mikey's level to talk to him. She asked him to show her his room, his toys, his schedule board, treating him with respect rather than pity. She spent 2 hours observing us together, asking thoughtful questions about our routines, and watching how Mikey and I interacted. She nodded approvingly when she saw his sensory corner and the picture communication cards we used when he was overwhelmed. "You've created a very supportive environment," she told me as we wrapped up. "My report will reflect that." I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. We were almost through this nightmare. I just needed her official report, and then Mikey could come home permanently. That evening, I got another text from Thomas. "Vanessa knows someone sent you the video. She's furious. Be careful." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Jordan from CPS. Mr. Williams, I'm calling because we've received another report regarding Mikey. My heart sank. What now? The caller claims you've been medicating your son unnecessarily to control his behavior. I couldn't believe it. That's completely false. His medications are all prescribed by Dr. Chen. I have the records to prove it. I understand, Jordan said, sounding tired. Given the circumstances and the judge's previous ruling, we're not taking action on this report. But I wanted you to be aware. Vanessa was getting desperate. The fact that this new accusation wasn't being acted on suggested CPS was starting to see through her tactics. But I was still worried about what she might try next. I called Elizabeth again to update her on the new development. This is actually good for us, she said. Multiple false reports strengthen our case if we need to take legal action against her for harassment. What should I do now? I asked. Document everything, and I think it's time we have a serious conversation about a restraining order. The next day, Dr. Ramirez's report came in. As expected, it was extremely positive, concluding that my home was ideally suited to meet Mikey's developmental needs and that our bond was secure and nurturing. She specifically noted that all medications and therapies were appropriate and well managed. Jordan called that afternoon. Based on Dr. Ramirez's assessment, we're closing the case. Mikey can return home immediately. I nearly cried with relief. Thank you. Mr. Williams, Jordan added, off the record, I want to apologize for how this was handled initially. The first caseworker should have recognized the specialized accommodations for what they were. I appreciated his candor, but all I could think about was bringing Mikey home. I drove to my mom's house immediately to share the news. Mikey was ecstatic, jumping up and down and flapping his hands, his way of showing extreme happiness. Mom hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. I knew they'd see the truth, she whispered. As we packed up Mikey's things, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Thomas again. Just heard CPS close the case. Vanessa is planning something else. Watch your back. I stared at Thomas's text for a long minute, my hands starting to shake. Just when I thought the nightmare was ending, Vanessa was planning something else. What the hell did that even mean? I deleted the message and shoved my phone in my pocket, not wanting Mom to see how freaked out I was. Mikey was buzzing around the bedroom, happily packing his dinosaur toys and chattering about going home. Daddy, can we get ice cream on the way home? The kind with the rainbow sprinkles? Mikey was practically vibrating with excitement. I forced a smile, trying not to let my new anxiety show. Absolutely, buddy. Extra sprinkles even. I ruffled his hair as Mom gave me a knowing look over his head. Everything okay? She asked quietly, while Mikey was distracted with organizing his stuffed animals by size. I hesitated, then nodded, just ready to get him home. We loaded everything into my car, and Mom gave Mikey an extra long hug. I thanked her about 50 times for everything she'd done. The drive home was filled with Mikey's excited chatter and, as promised, a stop for ice cream. Walking back into our house together felt surreal after the hell of the past week. That night, after getting Mikey settled back into his own bed, I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think. Vanessa clearly wasn't finished with us. I couldn't keep living in fear of what she might do next. It was time to go on the offensive. I called Elizabeth first thing the next morning while Mikey was eating breakfast. I need to know what my options are here, I told her. Thomas says Vanessa is planning something else against us. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. We have multiple documented false reports now. That's harassment, potentially defamation, depending on what she's told people. We could file for a restraining order or even pursue civil damages. I just want her to leave us alone, I said, watching Mikey carefully arrange his cereal in patterns only he understood. What's the fastest way to make that happen? Let me draft a cease and desist letter. Coming from a lawyer, it might be enough to scare her straight. And if not, it establishes a paper trail for further legal action. I agreed, and Elizabeth promised to email me the letter by end of day. Meanwhile, I called Dr. Chen to update her on the situation and scheduled an appointment to get Mikey back into his routine. With Mikey back at school the next day, I tried to settle back into normal life. His teacher, Mrs. Wilson, had been amazingly supportive through everything, sending home activities during his absence and making his return as smooth as possible. She pulled me aside during drop-off. I just want you to know we're all on your side here, she said. The whole staff knows what happened. If anyone suspicious comes asking about Mikey, we'll contact you immediately. I thanked her, relieved to have allies watching out for us. Elizabeth emailed the cease and desist letter that afternoon. It was formal and intimidating, outlining all of Vanessa's actions and warning of legal consequences if the harassment continued. I printed it, planning to mail it certified so she couldn't claim she never received it. That evening, I was helping Mikey with his bath when the doorbell rang. Telling him to stay put for a minute, I quickly dried my hands and went to answer it. When I checked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was Vanessa. For a split second, I considered not answering, but then I realized this might be my chance to end this once and for all. I opened the door, but blocked the entrance completely. What do you want? I asked coldly. Vanessa looked different than at the wedding or courthouse. Her makeup was minimal and she seemed tired. I need to talk to you, she said. I have nothing to say to you. In fact, I was just about to mail you this. I grabbed the cease and desist letter from the side table and thrust it at her. She took it, glancing at the letterhead. More legal threats? Real mature? You tried to take my son away from me with lies, I said, keeping my voice low but intense. You're lucky all you're getting is a letter. Vanessa's face hardened. You humiliated me at my wedding, in front of everyone I know. You humiliated yourself when you screamed at a disabled child, I countered. Now get off my property before I call the police and report you for harassment. I started to close the door, but Vanessa stuck her foot in the way. Wait, Thomas left me. That stopped me cold. What? He left me? She repeated, her voice cracking slightly. 3 days ago. Said he couldn't be with someone who would do what I did to Mikey. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a flash of vindication, but seeing her obvious distress made it hollow. That's between you and Thomas, I finally said. It has nothing to do with me or Mikey. He was helping you, wasn't he? She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. The video. It had to be him. I kept my face neutral. The last thing I needed was to get Thomas in more trouble if there was any chance of reconciliation between them. Doesn't matter who sent it. What matters is you were caught in your lies. And you need to stop. Now. For good. Vanessa's expression changed, hardening again. You think you've won, don't you? That everyone's on your side now? Well, guess what? I've been talking to other family members, telling them how you're using Mikey's condition for attention and sympathy. I couldn't believe she was still trying to turn people against us. Get out, I snapped, pushing the door against her foot. People believe me, she continued. Daddy? Mikey's voice came from behind me. I'm all clean now! I turned to see him standing in the hallway, wet hair sticking up in all directions, wearing his dinosaur pajamas. When he spotted Vanessa, his whole body tensed. It's the mean lady, he whispered loudly, his hands starting to flap anxiously. Vanessa's eyes widened as she looked at Mikey, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. He was starting to rock back and forth, a sure sign of rising anxiety. Buddy, go wait in your room, I said gently. I'll be there in just a minute to read your story. But Mikey didn't move. He was staring at Vanessa with an intensity I rarely saw from him. Then, to my complete surprise, he stepped forward. You were mean to my daddy, he said, his voice wavering but determined. At the fancy party, you yelled and made people sad. Vanessa seemed stunned into silence. Mikey continued, his words coming faster now. I didn't do anything bad. I was quiet like Daddy said, but you were loud and scary. His hands were flapping more intensely, but he kept going. You shouldn't be mean to people. That's what my teacher says. I was frozen, watching my son stand up for himself in a way I'd never seen before. Pride swelled in my chest, momentarily drowning out my concern about his rising agitation. Vanessa looked from Mikey to me, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door and immediately went to Mikey, who was now in full stimming mode, rocking and flapping. Hey buddy, that was really brave, I said, guiding him back to his bedroom. I'm so proud of you for using your words. It took longer than usual to get him settled that night. The encounter with Vanessa had triggered his anxiety, and we had to go through his calming routine twice before he was relaxed enough for sleep. As I sat beside his bed, watching him finally drift off, I wondered if Vanessa's unexpected visit was the something else Thomas had warned about, or if there was more coming. The next morning, I got a surprising email from Jordan at CPS. He wanted to meet with me to discuss some new developments. My stomach nodded instantly, but I agreed to see him during Mikey's school hours. Jordan met me at a coffee shop, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to talk to you off the record, he said, after we sat down. We received another report about you yesterday. My hands clenched around my coffee cup. Let me guess. From my niece Vanessa? Jordan shook his head. That's just it. It wasn't from her. It was from someone named Charles Johnson. Claims to be your uncle. I blinked in confusion. I don't have an uncle, Charles. The only Charles in the family is realization dawned. That's Vanessa's dad, my mom's brother. Jordan nodded slowly. The accusations are almost identical to your niece's, too similar to be coincidence. She's using her dad to make the reports now, I said, the pieces clicking into place, since she knows you're onto her. Normally, we'd have to investigate any new report, Jordan explained. But given the pattern here, and Dr. Ramirez's recent positive assessment, my supervisor has marked this as potentially malicious. He paused. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I thought you should know what you're dealing with. I thanked him for the heads up, my mind already racing with this new information. When I got home, I called Elizabeth immediately and explained what Jordan had told me. This is actually perfect, she said, sounding almost pleased. And now we can demonstrate a pattern of coordinated harassment. I'd like to amend our cease and desist to include all members of Vanessa's immediate family. While Elizabeth worked on the legal side, I decided it was time to bring in reinforcements of my own. I called my mom and filled her in on everything. Vanessa's visit, Uncle Charles's false report, all of it. Mom was livid. Charles always did whatever his precious daughter wanted, she fumed. But this is beyond the pale. I'm calling a family meeting. I tried to talk her out of it. worried it would only escalate things, but Mom was adamant. This isn't just about you and Mikey anymore. They're dragging the whole family into their vendetta. Everyone needs to know what's really happening. The family meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at my mom's house. I was a nervous wreck leading up to it, especially when Mom told me she'd invited everyone, including Vanessa and her parents. I arranged for Mikey to have a play date with his friend from therapy so he wouldn't have to deal with the stress. When Sunday arrived, I was surprised by how many people showed up. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I hadn't seen in years. Apparently the family drama had piqued everyone's interest. Vanessa came with her parents, her face a mask of composure that slipped when she saw how many people were there. Mom took charge immediately. I called you all here because there's been a campaign of harassment against my son and grandson, she announced once everyone was seated, and it's coming from inside this family. You could hear a pin drop. Mom laid out everything chronologically. The wedding incident, the CPS calls, the false accusations. She had printed copies of Dr. Ramirez's report and the cease and desist letter, which she passed around. And now, she finished, staring directly at Uncle Charles. We have reason to believe others are making false reports to continue this harassment. Uncle Charles turned red. I was just concerned about the boy. You've seen Mike exactly twice in the past 3 years, Mom cut in. Both times at family gatherings that you left early. You have no idea what he needs. Aunt Linda, another of Mom's siblings, spoke up. Vanessa told us Mikey was out of control at the wedding rehearsal, that he was screaming and disrupting everything. That's a lie, I said firmly. Mikey didn't make a sound until Vanessa started screaming at him. Ask anyone who was actually watching. To my surprise, one of Vanessa's bridesmaids cleared her throat. He's right, she said, not quite meeting Vanessa's furious gaze. The little boy was just sitting there smiling. Vanessa was the one who flipped out. You beach, Vanessa hissed at her former friend. After everything I did for you, enough. It was Thomas, standing in the doorway. I hadn't even known he was coming. Enough lies, Vanessa. The room went silent again as Thomas walked in and stood next to me. I've watched this go on too long, he said. First the wedding, then convincing Jenna to make that false statement to CPS. Then getting your dad involved. Vanessa looked around the room, clearly realizing she was losing her audience. You don't understand, she tried. He deliberately humiliated me at my wedding by playing that recording, after you publicly humiliated his son by screaming at him for existing, Thomas countered. I told you to apologize back then, and none of this would have happened. Uncle Charles was looking increasingly uncomfortable as more family members started murmuring among themselves, many giving Vanessa and her parents disgusted looks. Aunt Maria, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke up. I always bring my daughter with Down syndrome to family events. Are you saying she wouldn't have been welcome at your wedding either? The tide was turning fast. One by one, family members expressed their disappointment in Vanessa's behavior. Some shared stories of times she'd been cruel or exclusionary in the past. It was like once the dam broke, years of bottled-up grievances came pouring out. Finally, Uncle Charles stood up. This meeting is over, he announced shakily. Vanessa, Linda, we're leaving. But before they could go, my mom stepped in front of the door. Not until I make something perfectly clear, she said. If any of you make another false report, contact CPS, or spread lies about my son or grandson again, I will personally make sure every person in this family knows exactly what kind of people you are. And we will pursue every legal option available to us. The room erupted in supportive agreements. Vanessa looked around at the unified front against her and finally seemed to understand she'd lost. Without another word, she pushed past my mom and left, her parents hurrying after her. Thomas stayed behind. I'm sorry I didn't stand up to her sooner, he told me. I kept hoping she'd come to her senses. I nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. Thank you for coming today. It made a difference. In the days that followed, the family rallied around us in ways I never expected. Aunt Maria invited Mikey for a play date with her daughter. Uncle James, who I'd barely spoken to in years, called to ask if Mikey might like to try fishing at his lake house. It was like Vanessa's attempts to isolate us had backfired completely. Elizabeth called a week later with good news. We've received formal written agreements from Vanessa, Charles, and Linda that they will cease all communication about you and Mikey, direct or indirect. They've acknowledged that any further false reports will result in immediate legal action. So it's really over? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. It looks that way, she confirmed. How are you and Mikey doing? I glanced out the window where Mikey was playing in the backyard, carefully examining bugs with a magnifying glass, completely in his element. We're doing great, actually, better than before all this happened. And we were. The whole ordeal had been terrifying, but something unexpected had come from it. For the first time, Mikey was truly included in the family. People who'd previously made excuses not to interact with him were now making efforts to learn about autism and accommodate his needs. 2 months later, we attended a family barbecue at my cousin William's house. Mikey was nervous at first, clutching my hand as we approached the crowd, but then Aunt Maria's daughter spotted him and ran over, grabbing his free hand. Come see the sprinkler. It's super splashy, she exclaimed. And after a questioning look at me and my encouraging nod, Mikey let himself be led away. I watched him playing with the other kids, his happy flapping, drawing, curious curious but kind questions from his cousins rather than stares or whispers. Someone handed me a beer, and I turned to see Thomas. He seems to be having a good time, he observed, nodding toward Mikey. Yeah, I said, feeling a deep contentment I hadn't experienced in a long time. He really is.